Hey there, book dragons. Welcome back to my channel. Today we've got a book review to do. Let's go. So I recently finished reading Shadow and Claw by Wolfe. This is a bind-up of the first two books in the Book of the New Sun, Shadow of the Torturer and Claw of the Conciliator. And I've got really mixed feelings on this book. It was okay for me. I didn't absolutely love it. I didn't hate it either. There were parts of it that I loved and things I didn't like about it. So we're going to talk about some of those things. It's a really well-loved book. It's very popular in the book community. I don't see a lot about it on BookTube, but I've seen a lot of reviews about it, a lot of people saying how much they love it. There's a fancy Folio Society edition, and Folio makes a gorgeous edition. I mean, it's all black with, and I think the pages are sprayed red. I mean, it's just, wow. It is a gorgeous edition of these books. I'm going to go ahead and read to you what it says on the back to give you a little bit of an idea what this book is about and what you can expect, or what you're supposed to expect from it. Severian is a torturer, exiled from his guild after falling in love with one of his victims and journeying to the distant city of Thrax. Armed with his ancient executioner's sword, Terminus Est, this edition contains the Shadow of the Torturer and the Claw of the Conciliator, the first two volumes of this 4-volume novel. And it also says that it was recently voted the greatest fantasy of all time after Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And I have one thing to say to that. Where the hell did they get that? I wouldn't say it's the greatest fantasy of all time. Not even under Lord of the Rings, but that's my opinion. So we'll get into the review. We'll talk a little bit about my thoughts on it. Feel free to disagree with me. I know a lot of people love these books. In fact, I've seen some people say that it's one of the few books that they reread every now and again. I'm like, okay, am I missing something? So yeah, let's get into it. I'm gonna start off with the cons because I want to end on a good note for this book. And you know, it's kind of one of those that it's for some people and it isn't for others. So let's start off with one of the major cons, and that I think would be the language level. Now, I consider myself to be fairly well read. I read a lot of difficult literature, Lord of the Rings included. Lord of the Rings can be somewhat difficult to read, although not compared to some other books, of course. I read much more complex other than Lord of the Rings. So, Malazan, for one, has some complexities that make it a little arduous to get through at times. But, I love books that enhance my vocabulary, enhance my thought processes and things like that. So going into a book like this, knowing what I did about it, I knew it was going to be kind of a step up in terms of vocabulary and things like that. I didn't exactly know how much it was going to be like that. So I started off with the physical book. I bought this really nice copy at my local used bookstore, and it's in practically perfect condition. I think I got it for like $5, and it's got this beautiful cover on it. This is the Fantasy Masterworks edition, and I'm like, wow, I love that cover, and I just, I've always wanted to read it, and I found it, so I figured I'd pick it up and give it a shot. halfway through the book, I switched to the ebook. And the reason I switched to the ebook was because of the dictionary. and I'm not talking words and phrases that are exclusive to this world. You've got to expect that with fantasy. There are going to be words and phrases that you only learn and understand over the course of reading the book because they're integral to the world. But no, the words that I was constantly coming up against were English words, but older English words, are archaic words that we don't see used very often. And like I said, I like that, but so many of them were words I never heard that I switched to the ebook so I could make use of the dictionary. That's one of the things I love about my Kindle. If I don't know a word, I can instantly find out what that word means. And even then, even though some of them I knew were English words, they didn't pop up, in the dictionary. So I was kind of like, okay. But I would not say that that's necessarily a con, because it expands your mind, it expands your vocabulary, things like that. But it does add a little bit of a learning curve for reading enjoyment. So I just want to state that right up front. If you are looking for an easy read, this is not the book for you. If you're looking for a quick read, this is not the book for you. I did get through it fairly quickly, but it took a while, and I had to put it down a few times and things like that. So be aware. The prose was okay. Like I said, it was very heady at times, and the plot was rather meandering. To be honest with you, this book is told from Severian's perspective. It's written in a first-person point of view, which is fine. I like books like that, but it's more autobiographical in that you're constantly following Severian along, and he is writing this as kind of a journal. So he's older in the future. He's more settled in his life. And he's recalling all of these aspects of his early days as a torturer's apprentice, and then on to his other escapades in life. And he has an eidetic memory. He can recall all of these things word for word and in fine detail. So he's recalling all these things and writing them down for us and telling us his story, but it really kind of meanders. He'll be like, oh, and I did this, and I did this, and I said this, and I said that, and oh, I thought this about this woman, and things like that. So I'm like, okay, when is this going to pick up? I found myself at many different points in the book not really caring. I'm like, okay, Severian, this is cool that you had this experience. I don't really care. Let's move on. So that is something to be aware of. One thing that I can see being a con and a pro, but I'll talk about the con first, of course, is the level of detail when it comes to some of the torture. I was not put off by it necessarily, but there were times I was like, whoa, that's really heavy. One example, for instance, is there is a part where Severian details the fine, minute process of flaying somebody. And if you're not familiar with what flaying is, it's basically gradually peeling back a person's skin from parts of their body and tearing it off and things like that. So there was at least one scene in the book where he was describing that in detail, and I'm going, oh my goodness gracious. I had to put it down for a few minutes just because it was so heavy. It's nothing I haven't read before. I mean, there's flaying in A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, it's commonplace in in a book like this, I guess. So, but I think that if you can handle that sort of thing, it's very minor in the story. Like, it's only really a couple of pages where it talks about that, and then the rest of the story is meandering again. So in this book, as it said when I read kind of the synopsis there, it follows Severian, who is a torturer's apprentice. He ends up developing feelings for one of his clients, as they call them. They call them clients because they're usually aristocrats and high-profile people who are brought in to be tortured and questioned. And so they try to give them the fineries that they're used to and treat them with respect. So they call them their clients. So their clientele are the ones that they're torturing. So he ends up falling in love, or at the very least developing feelings. The back of the book kind of called it love. I don't know if I'd call it that, but it was kind of a complicated relationship. But anyway, he ended up giving this client a way out so that they wouldn't have to suffer anymore, and he was banished from the Citadel of Tortures at that point and had to go on to another assignment that they clued him into another assignment that he could take up, that people who don't really cut it in the Torturers Guild can move on to other things and be quite successful in. So it's kind of like job placement, if you will, which was kind of interesting. But so that part was kind of cool to see his transition from one thing to another, and yet the respect that his garments, his robes, and his torturer's mask gave him as he made his journey across the wastelands and across the country to go to these different places, because he got to keep his robes and his vestments and things like that. He got to keep his sword, Terminus Est, and so he ends up going on and performing a few different duties. He ends up being an executioner in a couple of circumstances, and he ends up being part of a traveling sideshow at points. And this is kind of what I'm talking about, is all the meandering. So those are some of the cons. Now let's talk about the pros, because it does have some pros. This is hailed. A lot of people label this as a sci-fi book. A lot of people label it as science fantasy. And some people call it fantasy. I kind of fall into the camp that it's more of a fantasy with sci-fi-ish elements. There are points in the story where you know that they are on a different planet, and people in the past have been able to travel through space and time and explore vast universes and galaxies. There are different types of technology. Traveling aircraft, I think is what they are. They're called flyers. And a few different things like that. So there is technology, there are sci-fi elements to it, but the predominant feel that you get in the book is fantasy. You know, he's a torturer, he carries a sword, there's elements of quote-unquote magic in the story that make it very fantasy-filling. I think the fantasy elements really outweigh the sci-fi elements. So that was really cool. I thought the author did an excellent job of weaving the two together and making it feel seamless. That is very hard to do. Science fantasy is not well respected as a crossover genre because it's very difficult to do and not a lot of people succeed at doing it. So the fact that Gene Wolfe was able to succeed, at least in my mind he did, with crafting a tale that made you feel like both elements were well represented and flowed together nicely, I thought that was really good. The prose was engaging despite some of the learning curve with the vocabulary, the prose was very engaging. It flowed really nicely. The storyline was interesting at times, even though there were times that I just kind of felt lost and why should I care about this? There were times I was really engaged, like especially right at the beginning in the Torturers Guild and learning about Severian in his early days and growing up in the Torturers Guild. He was most kids are delivered there as either toddlers or maybe sometimes even babies and raised in the Torturers Guild and apprenticed. That was really interesting and thought-provoking. I've never seen a story do anything quite like that. So that was really good. The character development for Severian was, I think, excellent. I there are things I would have liked to have known more about his motives behind certain things and more of his thoughts and feelings on certain things, but overall I thought his character was very fleshed out. He encounters many different companions along the way, we'll say. A young woman named Dorcas. There is a group of traveling performers that he ends up connecting with and being part of their performing troupe for a while, off and on. So that was kind of interesting to see those characters. They brought a very unique and quirky element to it. Even though Severian did so many different things during the story that I was kind of like, okay, you're just kind of hopping from job to job. I kind of want to find out where this is going. But he ends up coming across this gem called the Claw of the Conciliator, which is the name of the second book. But the claw is an artifact. It's a medallion of sorts encrusted with different jewels, and it has some special abilities, one of which is healing. So that was kind of cool to see him use that and connect with that to help different people. So it was just kind of like a journey with Severian as he did a whole bunch of different things and connected with a whole bunch of different people. Not all of it was bad. Some of it was pretty entertaining. And so yeah, I can see why people like this book. My overall thoughts, I honestly don't know if I will continue with the series. I'm leaning toward no. I definitely won't reread this, and I don't feel a burning desire to continue with the series. That being said, I think there are some people who may enjoy this series, and if you've watched this review and you like some of the things I've talked about, you like that in your books, then maybe this is a good book for you. It didn't totally land for me. I definitely didn't hate it, but it wasn't great. One thing also that did bother me, and this has been said about Dresden Files too. There are people who comment about the earlier Dresden books and his interactions with women being very creepy. And that is true in the first couple of books or so, but Harry Dresden grows and prospers and things like that over time, and he matures a lot. Severian definitely had a very creepy relationship with women, and that did not really change. In fact, at some points it got worse, I think. So yet another con for me to throw at you. Sorry, I kind of went back to cons there, but that's just something to keep in mind. Would I recommend this? I don't feel like I can personally recommend it to most people. But if you've watched this review and you think it would be an interesting book, something that you might enjoy, by all means have at it. I'm definitely going to unhaul this book. I still have the ebook. I can't get rid of the ebook. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Shadow and Claw. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think? Have you read this book? Do you think I'm way off base? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to chat with you about it. And until next time, guys, make sure you are reading more books. Talk to you later.